growing up, we would always go out to Notai. And I thought Notai was the name of our property. I didn't even know that there was a town of Notai because, well, my grandparents, my dad's parents lived in Cheshire, which is outside of Junction. And we'd go out to Notai, and it's like, well, that's, that's the family property. And I think I was probably like 10 before I realized there was a little town, because we go out 36 to Poodle Creek and then we just turn and we're at our property. And my grandparents built a house in 1937 just in time to bring my dad's oldest sister home from the hospital. And that house today my brother and sister-in-law live in. And then we built our house 75 and moved in 76. So I've lived out here off and on since 1976. So we moved out here in March of 76. So I was in 6th grade. And people's like, oh, you grew up out in the trees. Well, I grew up in Springfield, and I lived on a dead end, so it wasn't like I was like in the middle of a neighborhood. But growing up out here, I didn't sit and play in the woods all day long. I stayed close to the house. And one of the first times Dad sent me out to the shop to chop kindling, I wasn't too excited about it, and I wasn't super careful. I mean, I didn't set out to hurt myself, but I cut my finger with the axe, and I didn't have to go to the shop and cut kindling anymore in the dark. And it was lonely because you had to get in a car to go to a friend's house. My best friend in junior high and high school lived in Elmira, and that was 7 miles away. And so my mom finally told me I had to get my license before I turned 17, because she wanted me to bring myself home from ball practice and after games. So yeah, with my brother being 7 years younger than I am, we have kind of 2 different upbringings out here. And we have 2 different upbringings to begin with, because my dad was in college at OSU from the time I was 2 until he graduated when I was 5. So my grandparents took care of me for those years, because my mom worked full-time as a beautician, and my dad was in school full-time, and he worked at the sawmill in Horton, which is no longer in existence. Just there's the pond, the Horton Pond. So Mom and Dad were busy. And then my brother came along when I was in 1st grade, and he had the stay-at-home mom. My brother was 5 when we moved out, and so the woods was his playground. So so living out here, I've never gotten very far. Started teaching in Mapleton in 1988, so I lived in a small logging community where Davidson Industries was the entity of the community. Being brought up in the woods in a logging family benefited me, because I made sure my students knew the importance of the woods from an economic standpoint, and the fact that it's a place that you can recreate in, but it's also a place that you can make a living in. And the year I started teaching, there were 3 of us that were brand new teachers, and I kind of had the inside track on the 2 of them, because they didn't understand what it meant to hunt, to have enough food on your table to make it through the winter, like a lot of our students' dads did, because they worked in the woods. And in the late 80s, you weren't working in the woods year-round in a rainforest. And Mapleton gets 100 inches of rain on an average year. Well, maybe above average year now. So, I got that. I understood that. So we had a Christmas tree farm, and I'm not really sure why Dad started with the Christmas trees. I think some of it had to do with just seeing that there was a need for it. And because Christmas trees, unlike turnips or corn, you harvest in 7 years. You have to be thinking ahead. And I remember the first couple years, when I was probably 16 and 17, was the first year we actually had choosing cut, and it was tiny. I mean, I sat down there in the station wagon, and people would come and want to cut a tree down. So that meant that he must have started planting those in about 72 or 73. Well, as a junior and senior in high school, I was trimming trees in the summer, because you trim the trees in the summertime, and you wear your steel-toed boots and your chaps, because the machetes had 18-inch blades and 12 to 18-inch handles on them. And you know, if you ever saw my boots, you'd see I would have lost a couple of toes if I didn't have those steel-toed boots. Probably in the 80s, we were the biggest choose and cut lot in the county. We had a person come out with their Percherons, and we had horse-drawn wagon rides, and we had a big tent set up with crafts, and my mom made wreaths, and we sold wreaths, decorated wreaths, and we'd have cookies and cider and hot chocolate, and there'd be a fire, and we'd bale the trees, and we'd load them up, and it was fun when I was in high school and college. But when my first year of teaching came along, and I became an indentured coach. No, I was told that I needed to coach girls basketball because I'd played basketball, and then my folks still expected me to come out and do trees on the weekend, and I'm teaching kindergarten. I was tired. So the Christmas trees, when we were finally harvesting and doing really well at them, it was also when we were in the midst of a recession and the log market was really low. So the Christmas tree production actually helped bridge the gap in those few years. I remember my dad saying that it sure would be nice if OSU would take a load of logs instead of a check for my tuition. And I think that's probably what helped put me through college through those years, because I was in school from 82 to 86. And then a lot of people, besides the fact that they had grandkids, Mom and Dad got out of it because the equipment for logging had become more sophisticated, and they could actually log year round without tearing up the ground so much and being such a huge loss with having to lay out rock and stuff. And then the other reason is my daughter and my niece were born within 4 months of each other, and Mom and Dad wanted to enjoy their time being grandparents. And believe it or not, selling Christmas trees can ruin Christmas. And I think the last year a Christmas tree came off our place was probably 2006. So what are we looking at? 14 years. When you don't trim them, they grow really fast. So the first time in my dad's 80 years, we bought a tree last year. That was not just a month ago, but a year ago. And then this year we went back to what we've been doing for the last several years, is looking at the top of a tree and going, yeah, I think the top 10 feet are going to be good, and falling a 25 to 40 foot tree. So that's the story of our Christmas trees. Unlike a lot of women in Oregon Women in Timber now, I'm not a forester. I'm just a third generation Montgomery living on our land. I'm a school teacher by training and profession, and living out here and being a part of different organizations is about protecting our family legacy and our heritage. My dad is the forester of the family. My brother's a fireman paramedic for the city of Eugene, and he retires in April, and he will start logging full time along with my nephew, who is almost 21. He's the one that's kind of picking up the logging slack here. I think my daughter would have more to do with it, but Dad has never come out and said it, but he doesn't really encourage us females to be too much involved unless he needs help getting firewood. So it was after my daughter graduated that I got involved again with Oregon Women in Timber. I had belonged back in the 90s, and I would say the biggest difference I see is that our organization had no female foresters in it in the 90s. And today, I'm like the odd man out. I'm one of the few that isn't a forester or a forest engineer, resource management person. So I'm involved because we need to be an advocate for not only our heritage, but for the industry, and make sure people understand that no matter who's logging the land, that they're not out to destroy what is here. So someone who knows the woods, my experience is practicality stuff. I mean, it's like, this is where I live. It's not like I'm an expert. I'm just an expert of living where I live. And for me, what it means is to make sure the people that don't live in the woods understand that the woods is a living organism, it's dynamic, it's constantly changing, and that you have to be working it like any other crop to keep it at its optimal point. And that people understand things like recycling that box of paper is really not going to do a whole lot of good for the trees, because it's the slash on the ground that ends up going to make the trees, or the sawdust left over from the lumber that's been done that makes the trees. So actually paper is a byproduct, and it's a product made of recycling things. So don't burn the paper. And then my common answer to that is use all the paper you can, because my dad, I can't keep him in the means he's become accustomed to on my Head Start salary. And so I need the trees to be cut to supplement this. And it make people stop and think. So, I mean, for me, I guess it's just giving people a practical look at what it means to live in a working forest, what it means to be advocating for something, but you need to know all the information before you really get on your high horse, because a lot of people advocate for stuff that is just based on bogus science and assumptions and misinformation. So for me, it's about letting people know they're wrong. Now, yeah, it's kind of fun to tell people they're wrong too, but to try to find a way to let people know there's other ways to look at stuff. And